Oops. I'll do it this way. That's too close. Oh, you know what? Backwards. There we go. Now we're better. It's okay. There we go. All right. So wave to everyone. Hello. All right, we have Nicole Clark. She is the Director of Human Resources from the city of Hampton. And Nicole, the first question that I want to pose to you is from a human resources perspective, what constitutes sexual harassment in the workplace? For example, does calling someone honey, sweetie, or baby constitute sexual harassment?
So Vicki, first I'd like to really start off with the definition because it is somewhat complex. The definition of sexual harassment could be an unwelcome advance, a request for sexual favors, verbal, written, or physical conduct of a sexual nature on the part of a manager, a coworker / peer, or even a third party. And it's really broken down into two parts. It could constitute a hostile work environment or something that's called a quid pro quo. So a hostile work environment could be created from any of those behaviors that I just described occurring in the workplace that would reasonably interfere with an individual trying to perform their job duties. Quid pro quo is when a person in a position of authority or a supervisor or a manager may withhold employment benefits or offer employment benefits to a subordinate individual who agrees to or disagrees to requests for sexual behavior. That being said, your question was, can simply calling someone sweetie or honey constitute sexual harassment? It depends. That word sweetie or that word honey being used in the workplace is inappropriate, but it does not meet the definition of unlawful one time. If that word or term is used repeatedly, and again, it makes an individual uncomfortable in the workplace to where they cannot perform their job, then it does constitute a hostile work environment. If that word being used is accompanied with a touch or a rub, then yes, it could constitute sexual harassment.
Thank you so much, Nicole, because I think, especially for us from the South, we use honey, sweetie, baby quite a bit. And perhaps we don't quite understand that if it's over and over again and the other party is uncomfortable, then it could constitute sexual harassment.
Right, and it even could be a third party that's uncomfortable. You and I could be having a conversation, and it's completely fine for us to say that, but someone else could be walking by, Sedoya could be walking by, and wait a minute, I'm offended. And so then you have a situation that needs to be addressed. Probably about 2 weeks ago, I was having a conversation with someone, and that individual referred to coworkers in his office as, okay, I'm going to go talk to the girls. And I responded, are you referring to your children? And it wasn't any malintent behind it, but that word is not something that should be used to identify coworkers. And so he corrected himself. He said, I'm sorry. And so again, because of where we are, because of people's upbringing, certain words are acceptable for them, but they're not acceptable in the workplace. And I think in the culture of Me Too now, it's very important for people to speak up if they are uncomfortable, and I think we're seeing an increase in that happening.
Thank you so much for that. Sadia White is the Executive Director of Eyes Wide Open, and she's here this afternoon to be transparent about her experience in sexual harassment in a male-dominated area. So what I'd like to ask you is, you were subjected to sexual harassment on your job. If you do not mind, please briefly describe what happened to you.
Absolutely. So I'm retired law enforcement. I started out at NYPD. And in that field, I was on a task force, assigned to a gang task force, and I was around predominantly males. They had what you would call break room talk. So you would walk into the break room and they would gawk at you. They would make comments about how you looked in your uniform. They would make suggestive, sexual, explicit comments about other females in the workplace. And I would always come into feeling like I was a piece of meat, or, you know, that I didn't really fit in, and I wasn't appreciated for my work, what I could bring to the table as a female officer. So I began to shy away from the break room, and then something said, no, you have to speak up about this. Speak to your supervisor. I had a female sergeant, so I went to her with the complaint. I said, I do not feel comfortable going into the break room. It's no longer a place of solace for me. I said, I'm constantly being gawked at. They're constantly harassing as far as their words with how I look in my uniform. Or, you know, Officer D, you need to come sit on my lap. I don't feel like those comments are appropriate. They have made a lot of different suggestive sexual comments about other coworkers, and I really feel like something should be done about it. So I thought, by going to my female sergeant, that she was going to be on board. And I felt comfortable talking to her. And she said, okay, I understand. I'm going to handle it. I'm going to get right on it. Don't you worry. Unbeknownst to me, she enjoyed that type of attention. She had a really close bond with the male officers. She went to them and she did speak about it. She told them who I was. She told them that I made a complaint against them, and I became blackballed within my task force unit. So while I used to work with a lot of different lieutenants and sergeants on a daily basis, they did not want to work with me because they felt like I was the snitch. And it made me feel so uncomfortable that I really didn't want to come to work anymore. I didn't know what other steps to take because there wasn't really anything in place. And I was so fearful that I was going to get kicked off of the task force. That was a huge step for me. And my next step was moving up the chain. And I had to rely on this woman, sergeant, to give me, you know, the stats that I needed to get there. So when I confided in her, I did not know that she was going to break that confidence and make me out to be the spectacle of the organization. So needless to say, and I will tell you, I'm so happy that the Me Too era is here and established and more women are coming out, because for me, I didn't speak out after that. I shied away from getting the help that I needed. And I became a silent victim. Today, I'm here as a survivor, and I do have an empowerment movement, and I do speak out, and I am for that the Me Too movement. I really feel as though when you go into a situation like that, we need to know what our recourses can be. Who do we go to?
Sorry, I'm gonna stop you right there because that's a great point.
Yes.
And I'm gonna go to Cortina. Nicole, she went into what is actually sexual harassment. What does it constitute? And I kind of want to go to you because I'm curious to know if, from her perspective as the Human Resources Director for the City of Hampton, and from your perspective as an investigator with the EEOC, is the definition the same or is it different? So if you share that with us, I'd appreciate it.
Actually, Ms. Clark, she basically hit the nail on the head with the definition. The only thing I would like to add to it is that sometimes there's this misconception that if it's a man and a man, that the man can't sexually harass another man, or a woman can't sexually harass another woman, and that is not the case. It does not matter what the sex of the person is. If you are uncomfortable, you're uncomfortable. And so those are some of the things that will come up sometimes, and people will try to debate, well, it was two women talking and another woman walked by and she can't be offended. Well, yes, she can. So that's the only thing I would add to what Ms. Clark already mentioned. In addition to what the EEOC looks at is we have what is called our elements of proof. When we look at different cases, what we look for in a case. And the first thing in a sexual harassment case would be, was the charging party subjected to unwelcome advances? It could be by touching, it could be verbal, it could be something that was somebody had on their desk that was inappropriate. If I'm in my office and I have, or I won't say in my office, but if I'm in the office in a common area and I have a magazine out that's got some things that are sexually explicit, that maybe I have the Cosmopolitan out that's talking about sex positions because that's what that magazine discusses. And so Marita walks by and she's uncomfortable by it. She could say something and have that addressed because she's uncomfortable. First of all, I shouldn't have it in work. So the next thing we look for is, did the charging party object to those types of advances? Did they say something? In not every case, the person may not say anything. Sometimes there are things that prevent them from wanting to come forward. If it is a supervisor, a manager, your director, that's going to be a little bit intimidating to have to go to the person who's writing your evaluation and say, you're making me uncomfortable. And that's not going to kick their case out of our office just because they didn't go to their boss and say, you're making me uncomfortable. If the advances remain, if the atmosphere does not change and charging party has reported it, or the issue has been reported and the company or the respondent didn't do anything, that's another thing that we look at. And then if they are aware and they don't make any type of effort to correct the behavior, those are the things that we look for in a sexual harassment case.
Thank you so much for that, because, I think what's really important is that, to Sadia's point, you experience these things. Where do we go? How do we do this? And what happens? So that brings me to Marita, who is a mediator with the EEOC, Marita Buford. And she's been mediating for a long time. I'm not going to tell it.
42 years almost.
You going to tell it, Marita?
I'm proud of it.
Say it.
It'll be 42 years in June.
All right. And so she brings to us a different type of expertise. So my question to you is, when and how are EEOC cases referred to mediation?
Vicki, before I answer your question, which I fully intend to do so, I'd like to address Sadia. I'm very sorry that happened to you. That is exactly the kind of behavior that the EEOC seeks to prohibit. There's two levels of sexual harassment. Really, there's the one when it's coworker to coworker, where you really need to let your coworker know that the behavior is unwelcome. Absolutely. And then there's the managerial behavior, where the manager should know better. So you really don't have to tell your supervisor, you're making me uncomfortable. Your supervisor needs to know better. But your coworker might say, hey baby, you look really good today. Mm-hmm. You are responsible for saying, hey, don't go there with me. I don't, welcome that kind of behavior. If it continues, you don't have to keep going back to your coworker and saying, hey, I don't welcome it. Then you can go to the supervisor, you can go to HR. But you should let your coworker know that the behavior is not welcome. If they're trying to, get with you, that's not against the law. But you need to let them know that it's unwelcome. If it continues, that creates the hostile work environment that Nicole was speaking of, and that's when you need to go to your supervisor and HR and let them know that it's unwelcome. But if it's a supervisor or any kind of line manager, they should know better. You don't have to. The employer is responsible for their behavior. And in answer to the question of when and how cases are referred to the EEOC, once a charge is taken by the EEOC, the director of the office and the staff attorney, and sometimes with the investigators involved, review that charge and they decide whether or not that charge is appropriate to go to mediation. The charges that are routinely not sent to mediation or equal pay cases do not come to mediation. Class charges do not come to mediation because we can't settle things on behalf of other people. And also charges that have some kind of strategic input, the charges that the commission are interested in maybe taking into litigation. Those charges are not automatically sent to mediation. Every other charge is sent to mediation. Oh, and I should also let you know, the charges that the EEOC receives that we know upfront have no merit to them and are going to be dismissed without any investigation. Those charges do not come to mediation.
Marie, would you kind of just give briefly, what is a charge that doesn't have any merit? What type of charge would that be?
It's a charge where the investigator counseled the party and said, well, you know, your charge really doesn't fall within our purview, and the person says, well, I insist upon filing, we'll take their charge, but we will dismiss it.
Got you.
A charge where we don't have jurisdiction, say for instance with sexual harassment, the employer needs to have 15 employees. If they tell us the employer only has 4, we don't have jurisdiction. If they insist, we're a public agency, we will take their complaint. The law requires that we take their complaint. The law does not require that we investigate it.
You know, thank you so much for that, because I think that a lot of people do not know that. I know I didn't, so I appreciate you sharing that information. Nicole, we'll come back to you. So just a simple question. Does training work?
Simple answer, yes.
Okay, tell me why.
For multiple reasons. Number one, education is key. Employers have a responsibility to inform their employees of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior in the workplace. That can be done through the establishment of a policy. It's important to have a policy to share with employees that clearly communicates what the definition of sexual harassment is, the consequences for founded violations of sexual harassment, defines examples, and once that policy is developed, to actually go out and train the employees on that. And not just a lecture training. Most of the workplace, it includes adults. Adult learners like interactive conversation, very similar to what we're doing here. Us not sitting up here lecturing, going on and on about topics, but interacting with the audience. And so having examples and scenarios, and that way the employees and the participants can engage with the facilitator or the trainer to bring about discussions and examples to really clearly identify what truly is sexual harassment and what is not. And in my experience, I've done training before, you will hear, hypothetically speaking, if this were to happen.
Right.
And so the answer is, hypothetically speaking, X, Y, and Z. I think it's important also for training participants to sign an acknowledgement at the end. That protects the employer. It shows, I know one of the things the EEOC will look for to see, as Marita said, if an employee brought this to management's attention, what was management's response? And they may ask, do you have a policy? Were people trained on that policy? When was the last time? Do you have documentation that the charged individual attended that training? And so it shows that the employer did their due diligence in ensuring that the employees know what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior and those consequences behind that behavior.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. Sadia, you were about to go into it, but I just kind of wanted to give you this option now. You said that you ended up becoming a silent victim. So it sounds like you took some steps, but then you didn't see any progress. I want to kind of throw this at you. Was the option of mediation offered to you?
It was never offered because the sergeant, the female sergeant that I took it to, she was kind of like the main attraction with the men on the force, and she did not want to lose that. And for me, because I confided in her, she, instead of taking that confidence and taking it to the next level as a supervisor should have, she just made me out to look like the joke of the task force, the troublemaker. So therefore, no, there was no mediation provided, and it probably would have been had I would have stuck to the case, had I would have taken it forward, moved it towards, taken it to a higher level, and I did not. I became silent,
They're doing.
With my training, I was like, okay, I've heard that before. Okay, so now we can get. Let's get ready to tell y'all, hey, I don't have on a vest. I don't know how much help I could have been. Okay. As I was saying, she did not take it to the next level.
Gotcha.
And I didn't either, because I felt like, you know, I felt really small, minute in the circumstances. And I didn't want any more trouble. I didn't want to be looked at as the troublemaker. So I did stay quiet. I didn't want her to ruin my job performance. You know, she was the main one to do that. I had to answer to her every day. So I did. I stayed quiet. And I to this day, I regret it. But I'm so happy to know that there is a movement for us now, and that women are coming out all over the place. And I appreciate what you said, Ms. Marita. I appreciate all of you on the panel, because women need to know, and men alike, what they can do when they're presented with a sexual harassment case. How do I handle this? How can I proceed?
And that's important. And I appreciate your transparency. I appreciate you, Marita, just sharing that with her, because sometimes, you know, the option was available, but if we don't know, we don't know. And that pain remains. It's not easily eradicated, nor does it disappear. Cotina, what I'd like to ask you is, when and how do sexual harassment cases get to the EEOC to be investigated by your department?
Cases get to EEOC after a charging party has decided to come forward, because either they are fearful of going to management and saying something, or they have tried it and nothing has worked. So they've decided to take the next step and go outside of their organization. It's very, I can only imagine for Sadia what it was like to not be able to trust your management. That is a big deal. In law enforcement or in any other organization where you don't feel like you can go to your management for assistance with something, you still have to work in that environment. That's something difficult to work with. You probably don't want to come to work anymore after that, or you come to work but you're not functioning properly. And I think sometimes, a lot of times, people don't take those things into consideration, that it affects your whole well-being. It affects your attitude. It affects your life. You don't want to wake up. You can start getting depressed. You may have to go to the doctor and have therapy and counseling, and it just affects you in all areas of your life when you are not getting the assistance and the help that you should get when you go to management.
Absolutely, and then you feel like your hands are tied.
Yes.
So, and I want to just reiterate, then you've got this other challenge, because just like when we were all little kids, we may have experienced something at school, our stomach hurts, we don't feel good, we don't want to go. Well, that happens to people as we grow up and we're grown, having to go to work. I don't want to go, I don't want to interact with folks, I don't know what they're saying about me, they're talking about me, right. Rumors, on and on and on. So I think that's a great point. And then you might have these absences that are not explained. That causes another problem, when actually the problem is somebody has invaded your personal space and caused you to become uncomfortable because of what either they said, did, or the actions that they're taking. So thank you so much for that. Marita, I want to reach back to your 42 years of experience. And what do you estimate is the greatest benefits that parties can receive if they resolve it in mediation?
Their greatest benefit is resolution and expeditious.
Okay.
That is a quick process. But, my 42 years of experience will not let me stay quiet. I just want to go back to Sadia one more time and say to Nicole, Sadia's situation is your worst nightmare. where you have a supervisor or manager who has decided on their own not to process the complaint that they received. They've just put their organization in jeopardy. Yes. That's a classic retaliation complaint. And that's where education and training is so crucial. The EEOC does require that employers have a sexual harassment policy, that they train their employees, and that the policy is visible, that the employees know where to go. Sadia mentioned, I didn't know what to do, and I needed to know where to go. The employer has the responsibility to let her know where to go. Yes. That policy should be visible. It should be attainable to her. And Nicole needs to make sure that her managers are trained to know that when an employee comes to you with a sexual harassment policy, it is not within your authority to handle it by yourself. You need to shoot it up the ladder. You don't, act like that, because she's just jeopardized her whole organization, because now she can come back and sue them for millions of dollars, for pain and suffering. And so that's where the training comes in. Not only should the employees be trained to know where they go, what they need to do, the employer has to train the managers on a consistent basis what they need to do, what their responsibility is. For instance, I heard Sadia say that she breached her confidentiality. Managers need to let the employees know, I can't guarantee you no confidentiality. I have to. I'm required to talk to HR about your situation. Now, I'll let HR talk to you, but I have to report it. I can't keep it between just us. I have to. My responsibility as a manager is to let the organization know that they're vulnerable. Something's going on that needs to be addressed. Just like if an employee comes to you and say, as a manager, John Doe is stealing. As a manager, you can't let that theft go out the door. The same thing with a complaint of sexual harassment, because in fact, that's revenue that likely might go out the door in the sense of a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it really, the training is really crucial for employees as well as the managers. In terms of the benefits of mediation, we try to conduct a mediation within 45 days of the charge being filed with the EEOC, whereas if the charge goes to the investigation unit, it might take, how long?
6 months to 2 or 3 years.
So, if we can complete the mediation and get some relief for that person in 45 days, that benefits everybody.
Everybody, including the person who's the charging party, including the organization. Yes.
Absolutely.
Because the longer it comes,
the longer it festers. Because like she said, I didn't want to get up and go to work. I felt like my career was in jeopardy. I didn't know what my next employment evaluation was going to be like. Mediation could nip all that in the bud. We deal with it right then and there and move on. So that's the benefit of mediation.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Nicole, what methods do you recommend resolving sexual harassment in-house? And then I've got a piggyback question. I want you to answer, what steps can small businesses who do not have a full human resources department, specifically small businesses with 15 employees or over, take to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace?
Okay, so to answer your first question, there are a multitude of things. It could start out as on one end of the spectrum with simply some retraining and educating a department or a particular unit that certain types of behavior are inappropriate. And again, as Marita said, and I didn't say it, but the policy should include the organization's position on sexual harassment and that it is not tolerated, and make sure that's clear. It could go all the way to dismissal of the charged party within the organization. It just depends on the findings of the investigation. In my experience, I've worked in different organizations, and the outcome of an investigation that I've done internally has ranged anywhere from very similar situation to what Marita stated, where a supervisor was made aware, They didn't take the appropriate actions as a representative of the organization, therefore they received some consequence for their behavior in addition to the person who was actually charged. I have experienced cases where an individual who was a victim, but through the course of the investigation it was also determined that they had a part, and so there was some corrective action for that employee as well. So it can run the gamut. It just depends on what has taken place and ensuring that you conduct a thorough and objective investigation. And that is what Human Resources is designed to do. We are the internal EEOC. So that's kind of the range for your first question. Your second question is for employers who are small and may not necessarily have an HR department. The internet has replaced the Encyclopedia Britannica. And the first website that I would go to is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They have fact sheets. They have resources, question and answers. You can read cases. Education is so important. We talked about that earlier. You are educated by training. You are educated by reviewing these websites. You can go there and find a ton of information, not only from an employer's perspective, but the employee's perspective as well. As Katina said earlier, it gives you guidance on what to do as an employee. Outside of the EEOC, there are human resources organizations that have a wealth of information. The Society for Human Resource Management, they have resources, and so I would encourage any small business owner to become a member, especially if they don't have an HR department. They have local chapter meetings, there are networking opportunities, and there's always some type of discussion about employment law. They even have sample policies that you can follow. That way you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So that's what I would do if I were a small business.
Thank you so much for that. Claudia, I want to come back to you. How did you recover from this experience? And what would you share with others who say, me too?
The first step was I had to acknowledge that I had an issue. After denying it and kind of crawling up into my little space and staying there, I had to open myself up. I had to open that wound again. And what I did was I sought professional help. That was my first step. Once I did that and I was able to talk with a professional therapist, because a lot of people don't believe in going to therapy, but I was closed off. I did not want to go to work. I was severely depressed, so I needed that therapy. I needed that help. Once I started and I sought the treatment, I started to heal. And once I developed a relationship with our Lord and Savior, I healed even better. Because at that point, I shut everything out. I wasn't the me that I am today. I wasn't confident. I didn't have a strive, and I was severely depressed. So that treatment, that therapy, a lot of people might not think they need it just because it's a workplace incident. They might not feel like in the workplace that they need therapy. There's a lot of stresses, a lot of triggers that go on in the workplace. And sexual harassment being so big, you need that extra, that other individual to talk to outside of their workplace. And I needed that. So I sought the treatment, I got the help that I needed, and I was able to move forward in a better space. What I would say as to the Me Too movement, this happened to me over 15 years ago. And I really, maybe 18 years ago. So I really wished that we had this same movement back then. I really wish that more women were able to speak out, because I know it didn't just happen to me in that situation. There were others like me who were scared to speak out, who did not know the steps to take. So what I would say to the Me Too movement, the women of this generation, keep speaking out. Your voices need to be heard. There are so many women who go through different challenges on the job, sexual harassment, and they don't speak out. Even now, with all of the things that we have in place with the EEOC, our HR departments,
even now, education is key. Educating us as to know, I think every organization should always have that type of training, and they should be upfront with it. And their employees should know what steps they can take if it should happen to them.
Well, want to tell you ladies, we got a question from Facebook. And the question is, do you have an anonymous line if employees want to use it? And what I would imagine that means to report any kind of issues of sexual harassment. So Nicole, I'm gonna pose that question to you.
We do not, but we do have a number, it's an information services number that citizens can use. It's our regular 311. And I have received phone calls of an HR nature that have been passed through that. So even though it's not dedicated solely for that purpose, there still is that opportunity. The other thing I would like to mention is that a lot of organizations have employee assistance programs, EAP, and those are benefits that are free to employees to use in their immediate family members, and it provides the opportunity to speak to a counselor anonymously to talk about workplace issues or things that may be affecting someone's ability to perform at their optimal level in the workplace. So there are a lot of resources out there that are available. One of the things that we do in our training, we have orientation, and these are things that we cover. We cover our position on sexual harassment. We cover that EAP is available as a benefit to employees, and that we, of course, in human resources are available as well.
So, in y'all's experience, Maria and Cortina, was that part of it, the anonymous line? Because I know when I worked for the state, that information was available. They had anonymous lines where you could report particular issues. Do you think that's a good practice to have? What are your thoughts on that, Maria?
Well, I think that's a good thing to have, an anonymous line, and a lot of large employers do have that anonymous line because a lot of them contract out their HR services. So they have this third party that, maintains this 800 number. I think that's a good thing because some people are, hesitant to go to their supervisor to meet with somebody, and they can get the ball rolling, by phone. One thing I wanted to correct is I said the EEOC's jurisdiction for a complaint is 15 employees. We're federal. That's the requirement for a federal complaint to be filed. But there are a lot of state agencies, Fair Employment Practice Commissions, that you only need 2 employees to complain. So I don't want anybody to take away that, my employer doesn't have enough, so I got to be subjected to sexual harassment. No. If the EEOC doesn't have jurisdiction, the FEPA does, the Fair Employment Practice Agency does have jurisdiction, and we work share with them. If we get a case that we can't handle, they can pick it up, and vice versa. So,
thank you for that.
Yeah, we do have one in Virginia.
Yes,
it's the Virginia Human Rights Council.
The Virginia Human Rights Council.
Now, I want to let people know it's just 2 employees.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
They're bossing you.
Right. And there we have it.
There we have it.
Cotina, could you kind of touch upon the Virginia Human Rights? Could you touch upon what they are and what they mean to the audience?
Like Marita said, they are our FEPA, is what we say, Fair Employment Practices Agency. Thank you. Our FEPA organization for the state of Virginia is the Virginia Human Rights Council. They are located in Richmond in the Attorney General's office. If we have a complaint where someone comes in from a small business and they have about 7 employees, they are referred there. We can still take the charge if they insist on filing. We can still take the charge, but we would not have jurisdiction because they don't have the number of employees. So we could refer them to that agency, which is a state agency, and they can take that complaint. We've also shared cases with them if they didn't feel like they had enough. I know last year they actually reached out to us, and I'm talking about the Virginia Human Rights Council, and asked us to give them some of our cases so that they could work them and investigate them. So
that's great. I mean,
yes.
I appreciate you ladies providing this insight because a lot of us in the audience, people who even work and help folks, we don't know all this. And so for you to share all that, that's important. So my last question to you.
Before we go
I'm
to
sorry,
Nikki, I
Rita.
have one more question,
Please.
one more comment based on something that Nicole said. She was talking about the kind of investigations that she conducted, and one of the outcomes was that the party who had filed the complaint was found to be equally at fault, and so that person was counseled. And so I'd like to say to your audience that there's a term that I grew up with, and it was like, if you grin, you're in.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of times you find yourself in situations, somebody is saying something, you're laughing, you're going along with it, you're not protesting it, and then later on, you want to file a protest, and the first line of defense is that you also participated in this type of behavior. So you need to let somebody know up front, I'm not into this. I'm not a party to this. I object to this. So if you go into the break room and there's this break room banter where the guys are telling jokes and you can say, come on guys, cut it out. Cut it out. I'm a woman. I don't want to hear this.
Right.
Something like that. You don't have to say, oh, I'm going to go to HR and file a complaint. You could just say, come on guys, cut it out. Or you can turn around and say, oh, you guys are at it, and turn around and walk out. So that's letting them know that their behavior is unwarranted. So I just wanted to make that point.
Oh, no, that's
you don't have to go along.
Complicity,
with it.
right?
Right.
Complicity.
Absolutely.
And if I could just add to that, that doesn't also mean that it should be a deterrent from someone filing the complaint. Again, it goes back to education. And so that employee who is coming to you may not have realized that what they were doing created or assisted in this particular situation. And that's not any penalty against that employee, but again, it's just to educate them. We don't want anyone to say, okay, because I didn't say no,
Right.
that I'm not going to go forward because I'm going to be viewed as the victim. Or we hear stereotypically, oh, well, she shouldn't have dressed that way. She should not have come in and given that look. Well, she didn't say anything. That still doesn't make it okay. It still doesn't make it okay, and that person should come forward.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of times, the first thing you see if somebody is either sexually harassed or in a bad situation where they are molested or taken advantage of, well, she asked for it, or her dress was too short, or her clothes were too tight. And I say this all the time, what I have on, what I'm wearing, doesn't give you permission to do what you think you can do, because I'm in charge of this. And I think that was a great point, so Nicole, thank you for adding that. What I want to ask each and every one of you, and this is the final question, this is from your personal opinion, would you recommend that companies have a small companies or otherwise, have a workplace relationship policy? Yes, no, and why? Nicole?
So I'm going to give the typical HR response. It
All
depends,
right.
and it depends on what the definition of workplace relationship is. I think there can be guidelines to where there can't be a managerial, supervisory, subordinate relationship between certain family members, and that addresses nepotism. I think as a whole, it really comes down to standards of conduct in the workplace. And so I'm going to look at it from a broader perspective and not just workplace relationship. How do you conduct yourself professionally in the workplace? And to me, that would address the relationship.
Thank you. Sonia?
I would say that I believe that they should have a form of workplace relationship boundaries, because it's necessary. I think that a lot of times, you walk into a situation where you start dating your coworker, and then something happens with you and that coworker, and you have to see that coworker every day, and that causes more stress in the workplace. So for me, and I am a small business owner, I would not want my employees to date one another, just to eliminate that stressor. We have enough stress in the workplace, and I just feel like as a code of ethics, there should be boundaries there. And
it would just eliminate so many issues that we would bring to HR.
Thank you so much. Marita?
The government does not seek to regulate relationships. The Congress, in its infinite wisdom, did not seek to prohibit relationships from being established in the workplace. If parties do engage in a consensual relationship, at the point that that relationship ceases to be consensual, then it may rise to the level of sexual harassment. I break up with my employer, my coworker, or my supervisor, and at that point that the supervisor seeks to retaliate, then I then have the right to file a sexual harassment complaint, even if I dated that supervisor for 2 years. At the point that that relationship no longer became consensual, it then rises to the level of sexual harassment. That's Nicole's worst nightmare. And I understand that. From HR perspective, I understand that. However, the Congress does not prohibit, and the EEOC does not enforce any kind of regulations in regulations to relationships.
Thank you, Marita. Cotina?
So she gave the government answer.
I love it. Absolutely. Me personally, I do think that organizations should have some form of policy in place. I'm a stickler for the rules in structure. So I think if things are outlined and they're clear, and not that everybody follows the rules.
Right.
But if you have a policy in place that says these are the things that we don't want to have or we're not going to tolerate, then you've kind of made it clear. So when people come to you with certain things, you have it in writing. This is what we're expecting. And I think sometimes companies or organizations, they operate on a gray area. It's not good for this group of people, or it's not good for this part of the department, but it's okay for this part of the department. And I think if you have a policy in place, that will eliminate all of those things because you've made it clear. We don't want managers dating subordinates because we don't want what Marita just mentioned to occur. When you break up and somebody comes into work and wants to shoot you now because they're angry, or you got a bad evaluation because they're angry, you can eliminate all of those types of things. And I just think it creates more issues when you don't have something in writing, when the rules are not clear and pronounced for employees.
I think it definitely creates issues. However, typically what has happened, or what we find happen, is when two people are engaged in a relationship, the employer becomes aware of it and it seeks to separate those two employees, whereas the female employee is usually the one who is transferred or inconvenienced. And so that then becomes a big EEOC problem, and something that we take seriously. So I would just, personally, I think that relationship prohibitions are good, but from a professional stance, the EEOC can't regulate that.
And it's not illegal, not a violation of the law.
It is not a violation.
All right, I want to thank my panel. If y'all would just give them a round of applause. And Cotina, I have a certificate of appreciation for you. Marita, I have a certificate of appreciation for you. Sadia, I have a certificate of appreciation for you. And Nicole, my favorite AKA, I got a certificate of appreciation for you.
She had to throw that in there.
I did, because I'm that girl. My name is Vicki Williams. I am the Executive Director of Open Door Communications, and we are a mediation and training firm. We bring to you today our fourth Coffee in Conversation. And I am so thrilled to have this esteemed panel with me. They bring together a multitude of expertises. I want to make sure that you understand that if you have conflict in your business or within your home, allow me to assist you in resolving those particular issues. I am your mediator of choice. My name is Vicki R. Williams Cullins. I am the owner of OPN-Door Communications. I thank you so much this afternoon for your time, and you can reach me at www.opndoor.com, or you can call me at 757-816-4478. Again, thank you so much, and stay tuned because I'll be having another Coffee and Conversation coming up soon. Have a great day.